Good afternoon and welcome to the Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can we move straight on to agenda item 1, which is the apologies? Can I bring in Chris Slade to give any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Pam Cameron.
Are there any additional apologies from the table? No? That's fine. Wayne Tomlinson. Thank you. I think at this stage it would be beneficial for webcasting to indicate who is exactly around the actual table. If I can go for my left-hand side, we have Mrs. Leanne Skellett, who's the Senior Corporate Improvement and Scrutiny Officer. We have Councillor Waite, Parish, Moby and Taylor. And in regarding the legal, we have Mr. Tim James, who's the Assistant Chief Legal Officer, and to my right, Mr. Christopher Slade, who's the Democratic Services Officer, and Mr. Geraint Thomas, who's undertaking the webcast at the moment. If we can move on to agenda item 2, which is the declaration of interest, can I bring in Mr. Tim James, Assistant Legal Officer, in regard to any possible declarations to be made in respect to the agenda items, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind members, please, if they do have any declarations, can they record those in the appropriate part of the register, which is with the attendance register, which is being passed around. Only declaration I'm aware of, Chair, in fact, I think, concerns yourself, and if you could just explain to the committee the position on that, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to declare a prejudicial interest, as I am a private sector landlord. I applied for a special dispensation with the Ethics and Standards Committee in relationship to housing-related topics. I'm pleased to say that I was granted special dispensation. However, I can only debate the subject and I am not allowed to actually vote, if that's okay with you, Tim.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And so, yes, so you can take full part in the debate and discussions, but not take part in the vote. That's in accordance with the Ethics and Standards ruling on the matter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. Thank you, Chair. Any other interests, members, that you're aware of? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we can move on to agenda item 3, which is page number 5. And this is in regarding the minutes of the last meeting. The members are reminded that the minutes relate to the previous item, the Welsh Audit Office report, delivering with less the impact on environmental health services and citizens. If the committee can go through the minutes of the last meeting for both accuracy and to confirm that they are correct. First page, page 5, 6, 7, 8. Can I ask that a committee member moves that the minutes of the meeting are indeed correct? And a show of hands? Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. If we can go through the minutes again to see if there's any further updates, can I bring to people's attention that items 4.4 and 5.2 are coming up shortly under the action sheet. So page 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay. Then if we can move on to agenda item 4, which is the action sheet, can I bring in Leanne Skellett in regard to updating members of the 3 action points, please?
Thank you, Chair. As per the Chair's request yesterday at pre-agenda, I will continue to pursue Kim Pugh in relation to item 4.3 to see if we've received a further update in the matter, and I'll let you know.
regarding, there's a bit more information on the 30th of November. We've also received a reply from the executive member in regarding our recommendations, and that information has already been disseminated as well. So can I ask the committee member move that the information given is duly noted, please? Thank you much indeed. Moving on to agenda item 5 of the overview and scrutiny report itself, which is the developing local housing market, the private rental sector. If I can read the suggested scrutiny activity, the Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee have been asked to review and scrutinise the steps taken to minimise the impact that a reduction of funding could have on developing the local housing market, and in particular assess the approach that is being taken by housing services to develop the private sector rental. Consider how reductions in funding will impact on service delivery, and make appropriate recommendations to the executive member where appropriate. If I can ask Adrian Wilcox, who's the Torfaen County Borough Councillor Principal Forward Planning Officer. Thank you, Adrian. We've only got a couple of questions for yourself, and so we didn't want to hold you back, if you like, from. What we'll do, I think there's a total of five questions. If you could be as concise and as brief as possible, because there's an awful lot to get through today, that would be very much appreciated. Question 1. Sorry. Question 1. And the question is, how will we continue to successfully negotiate and develop affordable housing in light of ongoing funding cuts?
All right. As you know, we mainly deal with funding in 2 streams, or for affordable housing. One's the normal social housing grant dealt with by housing. The one we deal with in planning is obviously the planning gain, and we have a policy that on most development sites we ask for a percentage of affordable housing to be provided on site, and then a sub-percentage of that is private rented, so we'll continue to do that. Obviously we do that in the parameters of viability, and that's the sort of key there. Hopefully as the market improves we should keep maintaining our percentages, and that's all we really can do. So we update our information which is required to justify it. So the local housing market assessment's just been done, so we sort of put everything in place to do it. We do an annual review of viability as part of the annual monitoring of the plan. Unfortunately this year we've had to drop the percentage in North Torfaen, but if the market improved we do have the ability annually as part of that report to up the percentage of affordable housing and adjust the market. So all I can say is we monitor it annually and we get the best deal we can.
Any supplementary questions? Norma, if you'd like to take question number 2, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Hello, Adrian. Has affordable housing been incorporated into the SIL now, as it was subject to consultation on SIL regulations?
Yes. As you know, we're preparing to go to members within next few months on a recommended SIL. We've practically finished the work. It's going through senior officers at the moment. Under the regulations, affordable housing is exempt from the SIL. So there's 2 ways you look at it. We can't spend SIL money on affordable housing, but in setting a SIL rate, we have to allow for all the affordable housing. So we can't set a rate that is so high that affordable housing, our normal ask, wouldn't be made. So in testing for the SIL, in simple terms, we take all the 106 that includes affordable housing, put a 30% buffer, and that's the SIL rate. So unless there's a site with horrendous costs, we should maintain our affordable housing. So the exemption is as well on the charge. So if a registered social landlord comes forward with affordable housing, it's exempt from the CIL charge, so it's sort of two ways. I hope that helps.
In regarding question 4, I believe you alluded to it earlier, but the council recently agreed to reduce the percentage of social housing to be built in the north of the borough from 10% to 5%. How many new affordable privately owned properties will be built as a consequence of allowing this reduction?
I do have the figures. I can send them to the meeting afterwards. Unfortunately, I didn't know this question was coming, but we did calculate it when we took this item to council. So I can forward you that sheet. It's got all the sites. I think in dropping to 5, there are two implications. All new sites will be looking at 5%, and sites with planning permission could ask for their 10% to be reduced to 5%. And sites with permission could ask for their financial charge, because on some small sites we take money, could be reduced as well. But we think I think when we did it, the impact was quite low. And once you've implemented a permission, it's quite difficult to do it. They can do it. I think the way you've got to look at it, though, is we've built a lot of affordable housing in North Torfaen as well. You might pick it up in the sort of further questions, but from today. But generally the market is that major house builders don't build sort of in the north. It's mainly the RSLs that pick up a site. So if you look at what's been built, we've built a lot, and I think you've also got to look at the local housing market assessment. If you look at that, it's quite a low demand now in the north, and I think that what that said is you've got stock on the wrong size, and you need to switch from sort of the 3 beds to the smaller ones, and that's the strategy. So I think all that added, but I can send you the information paper we produced in anticipation of that question as a follow-up.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Thank you very much indeed. Norma, if you could ask question 3, please.
Yes. The Local Housing Market Assessment 2015 indicates that 955 social housing properties will need to be delivered over the next 5 years. Can this figure be achieved?
Probably not. I think you've got to look at, when I did the local plan, I'm not sure the figures are the same, our need was 35% affordable housing. When the local plan said we could only deliver 24, and I think you've got the same here again. And your social housing grant is reduced over time, it's quite limited. Planning viability, we're doing quite well in the south. Viability is improving, keeping, so we should be maintaining our percentages. But generally, I don't think anyone ever meets their target unless your need's quite low.
And the last question, 4007, which is an average of 1,566 over a 5-year period, new dwellings need to be built, of which 1,132 or 24% need to be affordable, and the remaining at market value. With the reduction of social housing grant budget, how is this going to be achieved?
All right, well actually, when we took the LDP annual monitoring report to council in, I think it was early October, we're actually meeting that target, but remember that, so we should be okay to meet this 24%, but not the 35 identified in that plan. The housing numbers are up. It's probably because of the social housing grant and other measures that's taken. Anything that comes through planning we put towards that total. And when we set the total, we didn't include things delivered through planning with social housing grant, so we will be making that target. So I think in there, I think we've only got to achieve something like 12-13% and anything left to go to meet that target. But obviously that target was an LDP one. I think your real target's obviously the bigger one from the last question. So I think we'll be somewhere in between by the time we get there.
Any further questions from the table? That's it. Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. If I can call Adrian Packin, please, from Mellin Homes. Adrian, I believe that you're the Director of Communities, Enterprise and Care. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair. Yeah.
Again, We've got about 5 questions again, which we'd like to propose. Norma, if you could ask question number 1, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Adrian, can you provide members with a brief outline in regard to how Melyn is currently working with the Council to help develop the local housing market across Torfaen?
Thank you. Yes, probably a number of ways, really. I suppose just going back in terms of planning, we were heavily involved with the Housing Summit that took place in September of last year, which is a strategic planning day really to sort of set the tone for the strategy, really. We're also very, I think, hopefully prominent members of the Strategic Housing Forum, which again I think is very, very important. But I suppose more than that, really, we've got a sort of ongoing daily relationship with both Neil and members of the Strategic Housing team, really. So whether it's dealing with the private sector, whether it's hosting our care and repair agency in Torfaen and Monmouthshire, developing, or involved with private sector leasing or homeless leasing, you know, we're very actively involved as an association, and have been so since 2007, since Melyn was formed, really. But I suppose this year it was the focus was really on the strategic planning day in September, which is trying to look forward rather than just sort of obviously reflect and look back, really.
Any questions? No. Question 2. In regarding funding and investment cuts, how is Melyn facing similar financial cuts that the local authority currently has to deal with?
Well, I suppose there's a number of kind of strands to it, really. I mean, there's been a lot of press across the UK, particularly in terms of some of the pressures that's happening in England, particularly where rents have been sort of capped, and I think in terms of rent reductions over the next 4 years, associations in England experience 1% reduction per year, every year. And unfortunately in Wales, with the support, obviously, of the Welsh Government, certainly for next year, our rents are and can continue to increase. Now, our business plan is 1.5%. Why that's important when you're planning over a 30-year period, it obviously enables you to have the sort of headroom to be able to invest in the stock. And since obviously Melyn came into existence, I think it sort of, you know, have to recalculate these kind of things, really. But about 600 odd units have been brought in to Torfaen. 58 million pounds worth of investment. Now, 28 million pound of that has been through social housing grant and subsidy, but also 30 million pound has been from Melyn's own coffers. You know, we've got a sort of huge investment in the valley. Though, if obviously the financial constraints come across the border, then that could affect sort of development programs, you know, going forward. But at this point in time, you know, from Melyn's point of view, you know, we're in a healthy position to be able to continue to invest. And picking up one of Adrian's points, I think the future really is about mixed developments anyway. Melyn has recently set up a commercial subsidiary called Know Your Home, which will be building and developing for sale, the first site actually in Abergavenny in the course of the next year. But the reason for we're doing that as a not-for-profit organisation is that money can be ploughed back in to Melyn as an umbrella organisation to invest in more affordable homes. So I think one of the issues here was about creativity in the future. We cannot rely on social housing grant because it's obviously been diminishing. So we've got to look at another way of bringing subsidy in to develop more affordable homes. So I think hopefully you would agree the track record is there. And you know, for the foreseeable future, one doesn't know about the long term, you know, we're in a good position. The only other point to mention, yes, of course, just like other landlords, obviously we're very concerned about the welfare reform, you know, cuts, and we continue to monitor that. But again, we've been able to manage the first stages of that through the bedroom tax in the last year or so, and it hasn't impacted on our rental income. We've been working hard to make sure that that's been brought in. So hopefully the investment will continue.
Supplementaries? If you could ask question 3, please.
The Local Housing Market Assessment 2015 indicates that 955 social housing properties will need to be delivered over the next 5 years. How is Melyn going to contribute to the development and building of social housing across Torfaen during this period of time?
Well, I mentioned a little bit earlier, like I said, we've built and developed over 600 homes in the last 7 years, I suppose, and that's been obviously with the support of Social Housing Grant and other grants that have come, plus our own investment that we brought in to the tune of £30 million. I think looking forward to the next 5 years, if we're going to achieve the targets that we need to for our people in Torm, both north and south of the borough, then we need to be able to mix up that funding package. And I think that's what I was mentioning earlier. One of the ways of doing that is if we're mixing the developments and some of the developments are going to be for sale, then that can cross-subsidise. And probably our most recent example of that in Melling was probably Kynant that we developed in the south. It's probably our biggest, still is our biggest scheme, actually, 111 units down in Cwmbran. And that's worked quite well with us because we had the great support of the council with social services, in terms of the learning disability units. We've got an extra care scheme on site. We've got some rented accommodation, but we've also got some private sales. And that sort of helped. So I think that is the way forward. We've got to be more innovative in terms of the way of bringing in private finance to cross-subsidise the affordable housing. Otherwise, we're going to find it difficult to hit those targets just through the planning regulations alone. Really.
Covers it. Would you like to do number 4 as well?
Right. What amount of housing stock do you currently have in your possession? You've said that, haven't you? Yeah.
I can just give you the numbers. I probably should have said at the outset that obviously, because we operate across the South East Wales region, we've got about 4,000 properties in management now, and of course we operate predominantly in Torfaen, obviously Monmouthshire, Newport, Blaenau Gwent, and we've got some properties in South Powys as well. So across the region we cover sort of the urban areas of South East Wales, some rural areas as well, and obviously a city within that. So there's about 4,000 properties currently in management, yeah.
Do you carry on doing all categories of residents, for single people and families disabled?
Yes, very much so. Part of my directorate's operation now in the last 12 months, we've set up a Living Well part of that, which will encompass a lot of our services to older persons, and that's where we're involved with the learning disability units. So we certainly still do general needs. There's a real issue for single young people, obviously, with a lot of the changes coming in under 35s, which we're obviously concerned about as well. But we're also going to have an ageing population, as we all know. So that's why we developed the extra care development in Kynant. And we've got a couple of other sort of proposals, in the development pipeline at the moment. And I mentioned about the 600 odd homes we've built to date. With our current programme with Torfaen, we've got another 133 in the programme currently. Crownbridge, Hillside, King Street, Pennegarn, Somerton House, which is a real exciting one for me down in Cwmbran. And on top of that, we've got another 1,000 units in pipeline across those 5 areas. So the important thing is to make sure you've still got the pipeline. You've still got to have the funding, but you've got to have the pipeline coming through as well.
I'm going to move to a slightly different topic, if that's okay. We had this morning at Council the donation of the original plan for Cwmbran Newtown back from 1951, donated by the son of the main developer, or the main architect, I should say. And a few of us were talking to him afterwards, listening to him tell us about what he understood from the plans which had led to Cwmbran Town Centre starting off in the 50s. And he mentioned one statistic which stuck in my mind, at least I think I stuck accurately, but we'll see. And he referred to the planning guidance which Cwmbran Newtown was developed on was to the effect that there would be no more than 13 persons per acre. Now, did he mean persons or did he mean households? I'm not quite sure, but does that sound like a standard which we've been able to keep to currently? Like on the Polymoyle site, would you be able to or whichever site, stick to that sort of number per acre?
It's a very interesting question, especially when you've gone back to before I grew up in Cwmbran, and this is 1959 onwards, so when I was born there as a new town. I think it's interesting in terms of densities, isn't it? And you know, there's a number of factors there in terms of, you know, obviously in investment terms, making sure that we get the best out of the investment and the number of units in terms of dealing with housing need, but also it's important that we try and it's in keeping with what's around and surround, and that we've got some opportunities. So it's not just the physical development and regeneration, we're looking at the wider social, environmental is important and economic. So there's always a little bit of a trade-off. I think once we've done, you know, so our calculations initially in terms of the kind of housing that we could get on the numbers, we're working very closely with Adrian and planners on that. So without throwing it back, there's some degree of control that you've got as a council over that. But we're quite sympathetic to the environment. So if you recall back to if I just refer back to the school site now in Cainant, as a school site as it was in my day, in St David's across there, you know, the footprint doesn't look that big in some respects. We've got quite a few units on it, but I think hopefully it is in sympathy with the wider surroundings and, you know, Southville across the road in the town centre. Whereas if we've done some work at Buch in Powys, which is a rural community, the density is less, and it's in sympathy with the Brecon Beacons National Park. So it is a little bit of horses for courses, but there is an underlying measure of the number of units you'd like to achieve from a planning point of view, and also from a housing development point of view.
Any further questions? Could I take this opportunity to thank you, Adrian, in coming along. I know it was a short set of questions, but your responses were concise as asked for as well. So thank you much indeed. That's all. Thank you. If I can call Anthony Davis, please. Now, Anthony is the chairman of the Torfaen County Borough Council and Monmouthshire County Council Landlords Hub, and also the managing director of 360 Property. There. Again, the same applies if that's okay with yourself. We've got a total of 4 questions. If I can lead the way. Could you give an overview of what the role, responsibility and requirements are of being the chairman of the Landlords Hub in the first instance, please?
Certainly, Chair. I actually head up 3 of the landlord forums or hubs, so Monmouthshire, Torfaen and Blaenau Gwent. Blaenau Gwent actually started first, but the Torfaen and the Monmouthshire are one of the stronger ones. The local councils realise that they still have a responsibility for housing people, but actually now they have no housing stock as such, and they need to work much stronger with the private rented sector. The private rented sector, I think I'm right in saying, as of last year, had a bigger housing stock on the rental market than housing associations, etc. So whilst a bit like small businesses, we employ more people or have more housing stock, typically most of the landlords only own 1 to 4 properties. So as individuals, they're not that large, but as a mass, they're very important. So what the Landlord Hub is trying to do is trying to bring across or bring up the standards of private rented sectors in the areas, also understanding who the landlords are. Again, nobody in the UK knows how many landlords there are in the UK. If you listen to the National Landlords Associations and various other organisations, the range of landlords they believe that there are in the UK, it ranges by a factor of 10. So it's very much about trying to explain, the council explaining what opportunities there are. Sometimes private rented landlords do not like social housing, and explaining that that's not always the case and how they can work together to help each other.
Question 2.
For a period of 12 months, In order to develop and improve links with the private rental sector, the council appointed a private rented sector access officer. Were you aware of him and did you meet with him or her, whatever?
Would that be Adam Harper? Yeah, absolutely. I know Adam quite well. I've met Adam on numerous occasions, and he's done a very good role. I think I'm in a fortunate position because, and one of the reasons I've taken on the role, it's a non-paid-for role. I do it because I like what I do. I love property, but also I realise a number of my properties, I'm a fairly large landlord, I end up with social housing. So for me to know the council, it's not, I hate to use the adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and it's just being able to speak to people. And that's again where the Landlord Forum works, getting to know certain people. Richard Davis is another person who comes along, who you're probably aware of, to the forums. So just getting access to those people, and Adam does that role where he says, he comes along to the forums, please contact me if there's any problems. So for me it's not so important because I probably know a lot of the people to contact, but Adam's a great point of contact where private landlords go, I've got a problem with a social tenant, or someone on housing benefits, or generally what should I do, or some advice. And Adam's he's not quite, actually he's very switched on. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Are you aware of any barriers, rulings or hurdles within specific departments or members of staff that have either stopped or hindered private rented sector landlords renting out their properties earlier than they would wish?
Maybe a loaded question. Yeah, no, it's fine. I don't think it's a local policy. I think, a lot of landlords don't like a few things at the way the government works, and this isn't a particular government. The fact that on day one, people on housing benefits are in arrears, according to private landlords, because we take rent in advance, whereas on social housing or benefits you get paid in arrears, which can cause issues. From a personal point of view, we talk about, or the local council talk about, partnerships with the private rented sector. It's a different view of my word of partnerships. One of the things I don't like about that is we would have, and I've had this situation, I've spoken to people like Richard on this, and his hands are tied. I will have a tenant who absconds, doesn't pay the rent, has taken the benefits. They then move on to another house, and they get paid the benefits. Now, my view on that is if I tell the local authority that Joe Bloggs, I've got a contract with, have left, and they owe money to me, that money that is going to them from the benefits should come to me. On two routes. Firstly, it should be paid to us directly, and that's changing with unilateral credits. But secondly, if you know there's a debt there, the local authority should also step in and help and guide it, because it's very difficult for us. Again, one of the problems with private tenants compared to people on social housing is if you're going to pursue them, what are you pursuing? With a private tenant who is maybe is employed, you've got more chance of getting your money back. Housing benefits, not necessarily. And I'd like to point at this point that I have quite a lot of social debt, and most of them are very good. Private and social you can have problems with, but it's what your recourse is with people on housing benefits. It's a bit more complicated.
Do you have any issues with other departments like environmental health, for example, who have stringent guidance, if you like, and guidelines which must be followed in order to accommodate a certain type of individual as opposed to a family?
Again, I'm fortunate. I know, rightly or wrongly, I know environmental health, and they have a job to do. And I think once you know what they've got to do, then it's a lot easier. All of my properties are at a high standard, even so the lower end rent. So I don't tend to come across environmental. Occasionally, where I have done, where tenants have called them in without speaking to me over a particular issue. I found that actually when you speak to them, you can usually, rats, for instance, as you're probably aware, rats are predominant around. I've just been to a property which abuts a Bronavon property, and they had a rat problem. It's nothing wrong with the property. It's just one of those things. Environmental might get it called in then. They do follow strict procedures, and some of them are very interesting. First time I ever met with them, it was over a property where we looked at should it be redesigned. The problem is the housing stock around here, the value. You've got this trade-off. The rents aren't high, the values of the properties aren't high. You can't therefore spend a lot of money to resolve some of these problems. But no, generally, again, it's communication. And again, that's, I think, where the Landlord Hub works. Anne Garrett from Environmental Health turns up at every single landlord forum, and she's always there to help and ask questions. So, quite useful.
In regarding the other authorities, do they work in similar ways, or is one authority more tougher than the next, if you like?
If you're about environmental health, I think they're all the same. I've met Anne Garrett was the very first person I ever met, and we had a strong exchange on our first meeting. But I would now say we're colleagues in a way. So she's very good. Brian and Gwent, no, the same. They're very similar. As you know, Monmouthshire and Torvine have strong links now because they do a lot together. But no, Brian and Gwent work very, very well. I had a rat problem at one of my apartments based in Tredegar. Again, rats are prevalent around there. We have a number of takeaway restaurants in the area, which of course don't help. And it's just a case of you have rats, you have to deal with them. As we all probably know, I think the statistic is nobody's further than 50 feet away from a rat. But again, it's a case of dealing with them. And again, environmental in Blythewent came down quite heavily to start with, but once they realise you are a responsible landlord, they tend to, work with you rather than working against you. And we all want the same solution. My ethos, and I think the problem we have as a landlord hub is, strangely enough, the people who go to the landlord hub are the good landlords, and it's how you access those who are not necessarily bad landlords at all, but they're below the radar screen, and people don't know who those landlords are. And they may be doing a good job, but maybe not, and it's getting above the radar screen, and so the ones that come to the Landlord Hub tend to be trying to work, providing good accommodation, because unlike what the press would say, I've never met a landlord, London may be slightly different, and I'm a landlord in London as well, but you don't want tenants to move on. You want long-term tenants. The cost of changing tenants over and the hassle factor is just not worth it for increasing your rent by £20 a month.
Part of your response there would lead me very nicely specifically onto the Landlord Hub itself, if you like. In the report, it states that there's over 3,500 households which are privately renting the property, if you like, in Torvine. Since 2012-13, numbers who attend the landlords' hubs have reduced by approximately 50%, from 300 to 140, 160. Why do you think that this is the case? What can be undertaken to increase the awareness of the hub and therefore increase numbers? And how successful is the partnership between Torvine County Borough Council and the Landlords Hub? And what are the advantages of having such a partnership? I know there's 4 questions there. If you want to come back, by all means.
4 for the price of 1. So the numbers you stated, for what period? Is that per meeting or?
Again, this is from the information given as part of the attendance at the appendix. Number of landlords attending the Landlord Hub, 2012-13, 300, and note 4 forums held in a year. 13-14, 145. Note 2 forums were held in a year, and so there's been not as many forums held, and 14, 15, 160. Note 3 forums were held in that year. So I'm also questioning who's funding, if you like, this hub as well.
Okay. I'm surprised by the numbers, if I'm honest, because the first numbers would have been right at the beginning. The hub is always very well attended. I suspect the first one might be because it was jointly held with Blaenau Gwent as well. So we've gone through period. Blaenau Gwent set up first. I'm looking at my records the other day. I think I've been chair of that for about 6 years. Monmouth and Torfaen then set up, and I then became chair of that about a year into it. At one point they decided to be together, and then as an entrepreneur I will say this, for political reasons they went their own way, and they decided to use their money in different ways. I'm not saying who's right. So Monmouth and Torfaen kept together, and they have a very successful, I think.
Going on with the fact, as I said, then there's 3,500, if you like, potential landlords, and going on with the fact that there's 140, 160. What can be undertaken to increase the awareness of the hub, which isn't currently being undertaken?
I think it's people knowing about it again. So I don't know whether, as part of the housing benefits, if you're paying benefits directly to private landlords, again, I don't know what the data protection rules are on it, whether there's any way of mail shotting or e-shotting those people or contacting them to make them more aware of the landlord hub. It is regular people that go to it, and there's certainly benefit from it. Of getting out there new ideas. You're possibly all aware of the House to Home initiative that was done by the Welsh Government, where they provide funding to allow people to bring out-of-date houses back into the market. Again, that was first announced at the Landlord Hub. Initiatives such as that, credit unions, etc., attend these. So there's quite a few good speakers there. It's getting it out there, I think, and it's knowing who those landlords is. As I said right at the beginning, nobody knows all of the landlords. There is no database of landlords in the UK, and I think it's how you advertise that, whether it's using the likes of the NLA, which is the National Landlords Association, or other such organisations to publicise it, or whether there's more direct method of finding out these are the people we're paying benefits to, as in where you're paying directly, which does happen still, to landlords, that we get that out to them.
I know that and this will be a question to Neil over the next half hour, is a case of, but there must be some form of the data available to say that 3,500 households are privately renting their properties, so there's got to be some form of data out there in which possibly we can tap into, if like, and with the if like the accreditation Wales coming on board now, if you like, there's going to be even more data which is going to be made available to yourself as chair, and so it will be interesting to, if like, to find out over the years to come how this hub develops and grows as I hope it will. If you could ask question number 4, Lorna.
Thank you, Chairman. This question refers to 7.2.1, so I'll just read out a couple of sentences so you know what it refers to. Torfaen has carried out a wide range of engagement activities with local landlords to promote and encourage the growth of the private renter sector. This has enabled Torfaen to develop a comprehensive data set and a broader knowledge of this particular housing sector. Have the engagement activities been welcomed by landlords, and has it promoted the private rental sector?
I'm not aware of the exact details of those, so I wouldn't like to comment on that because it would be unfair. I think it may be some of the stuff that, again, Adam may have done. I know he's certainly engaged with a number of landlords to get feedback, but the specifics of those I'm not aware of, so not aware.
And one last question for myself. Is there anything that Torfaen County Borough Council can be doing better, if you like, to work alongside the Landlords Hub?
Other than helping with increasing the numbers are good. You know, compared to Blaenau Gwent, where it's now faded by the wayside for various reasons. The numbers at the Torfaen, it's a joint Torfaen Monmouthshire, are very good. They can always be better. I think from a Torfaen perspective, it would be good to get more numbers there. The more numbers there, the better it is to get guest speakers. What we miss in the valley areas is the vibe of private rental people of trying to do more with their housing stock and bringing up the levels, which again is unfortunately is to do with the rent that you can achieve. You know, the difference between a very poor... I remember 6 years ago developing some flats in Pontypool, which I've just been to this morning, and I looked at another building at the other end of town to see, when I was new into it around here, what the rent values were, and the place should have been closed down, but the amount of rent he could charge was quite high, and there's a limit which is set. You know, unfortunately, it doesn't matter if you've got a 5-star penthouse, there's a limit on it. But I think it's getting the numbers there, and so that there's more. The more people we get at these events, the better the speakers we can get that come to it, because they're more willing to come, which then hopefully brings more initiative to local landlords. And rather than being a landlord as a sideline, so they work doing whatever job they may do, and they own 1, 2 or 3, it would be nice to see some bigger landlords who therefore see it as, like I am, it's my living. I'm a professional landlord, and therefore it's in my interest to raise the bar, because, you know, we put systems in place, we computerize things, we do online contracts, all of these sort of things. You know, I can meet a tenant, and I can get a tenant within the house within the same day if I have to, and that includes checking the tenant and providing contracts and getting the contracts all signed. And then also looking at the maintenance side, where, you know, we look at prioritising maintenance, and I think it's trying to raise that bar within reason. You know, what you don't want to do is be putting landlords off or stopping people from renting, you know, because unfortunately, unlike in London where rents are phenomenal, in the valley towns, you know, I was looking this morning for a particular reason, 2-bedroom houses, or 3-bedroom houses in fact, available for £350. That doesn't give you a great deal of margin if something goes wrong and you've got to replace a few things. That's your year's rent gone. So it is tough as a private landlord in the area.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come in. Mr Davis, you meet a number of times a year as the hub. Could you just give me an idea of what some of the issues that your private landlords, what's their main topics when they come along?
Usually 3 issues: benefits, benefits, benefits. Ask Richard. A lot of it has been around benefits over the last 18 months because of the changes that are going on. So Richard is very good to turn up there and takes a lot of good flack, you know, from the landlords. They are concerned with the way it works, and some of them come there and want to air their particular points. And Richard's very good at responding to that. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty what's going to go on with the unilateral credits, which is, you know, our concern, as you're possibly all aware, that to give individuals a lump sum of money, the multi-millionaire landlords who've got no bank mortgages to pay will get paid last, is the way it's seen. And that's my view, but that's the concerns that we have. So Richard does that, but we also go through other things. They look at it could be off topics about insurance. It could be how you deal with tenants chasing debts or evicting tenants. So we'll have specialists coming in to talk about how to set up your tenancy agreements and how to evict a tenant that won't leave. We have Citizens Advice Bureau coming to defend their position, because sometimes they're seen as the bad people, because people often see that the tenants go to them for advice and then they give them certain advice that they go after the landlords. So it's a lot of that. It tends to be how to run tenancies, also working with promoting some of the schemes within the Welsh Government of becoming a better landlord, registering the landlords, the new scheme that you've got to be registered by this November for. All of those sort of finer points are covered. Deposit schemes, how that runs, how it operates. I would think, myself included, there's probably not a landlord in Wales that isn't breaking the regulations some way or another. Absolutely, and that's fine. Just from a minor point, not doing inventories. There's nothing illegal about not doing inventories, but if you want to try and get your money back at the end of the deposit, you won't. So it's from simple things. So it's trying. We have speakers in who will go through those certain points and explain. This is how you can do it, what you should be doing as a good landlord. And trying to raise it. But a fair amount will be around benefits. It could be environmental. It'll be legislation. A lot of it's around legislation as well on there. So a lot of the local, be it the environmental representative for Torfaen, Monmouthshire, or Richard, as I said, for benefits. It could be the schemes such as the House to Homes loan and explaining that, etc.
In regarding the new landlords, because we're well aware that there's an awful lot of accidental landlords out there who basically inherit properties, etc. In regarding barriers, what would you say are or can be seen as the perceived barriers, if any, to stop a property owner from renting their dwelling? I.e., the bond might be too bureaucratic. I'm not going to say any more, but what would you say are the barriers to stop people from renting their properties?
I assume you mean the benefit sector, as in people on housing benefits?
Well,
or generally?
Generally speaking.
Assuming the house is in good condition and they don't need to do it up, sometimes it's fear, particularly if they're looking, I remember speaking to some of them in the Blaenau Gwent area who had flats above shops, and they didn't want to let those out because they'd done it before and the hassle factor wasn't worth it. Again, you get into this, I'm renting a flat out for 300 to 350 a month, it got wrecked, I've now got to get a new kitchen in, was it really worth doing it? And I remember, without going into which authority, but it's not this one here, sitting with the head of environmental to have a meeting just about some landlord hub meetings, and I overheard a phone call in the background where they had a tenant, and as I say, they have a responsibility to house them, and he was on his third house and had wrecked it again. And the question was, well, what do you do as a council for this? You've got to be in a situation where you've almost got to be building houses out of concrete, so concrete baths, concrete settees, concrete beds, because the issue they have is, I know the council very well, and in the past I've taken on tenants, but they know that they give me one bad tenant and that'll be the last tenant I'll take on. So, but they've got to go somewhere. And there are landlords who will take those tenants on, knowing it, but it's a catch-22. They, of course, have got to provide good accommodation. It's got to be up to standards. They're not getting paid huge rents. If the property gets wrecked, suddenly you go, I've just lost all my money. Of course, you've got the bond scheme, which can work. I sort of take it. I've changed my slant on things now. I'm quite happy to let to benefits, but we do take guarantors. And my view is, if they say to me, "I'm sorry, I haven't got a guarantor," my simple answer is, my flat, which is worth £40,000, £50,000, I'm afraid you're not having the keys to it. And it's as simple as that. Now, in fairness, there are people out there who can't get guarantors. It's not my problem. I can't afford I've been fortunate, or maybe it's not fortunate, maybe it's because we've been selective, not to have too many problems. We have had our problems, and still do. You can't be 100% right, but it's an expensive mistake.
In regarding moving forward then, how is Torfaen County Borough Council going to tackle these perceived barriers which could be stopping local residents renting their property? Because at the end of the day, we need more affordable private sector accommodation.
I think they've done some of it, and I think they could publicise it more, which is where maybe the council or the housing associations take over the private rented sectors, properties, and guarantee that they'll take it off them and rent it out for 3 to 5 years, and it will return in the same condition. And that will be done at a reduced rent, which is only fair. You know, as a private landlord, if someone came to me and said, I'll take your properties off you and I'll guarantee your rent for some years, you can't expect to get market rent. Appreciate that puts a bit of a burden on the local council, but it's a quid pro quo on that side, because I think there's lots of people talk about getting out of the rented sector because of a lot of the legislations coming on. You'll be aware of the new tax legislations, which is quite incredible by the government at the moment. You know, if they did that to business, to say we're now going to charge, not allow you to take your bank charges off your profits, the whole business would stop. Without doubt, to do that to private landlords is incredible. So I think one way around it, I mean, there are initiatives around it, but where the local authority, if they need housing stock, is to take it off these people who don't want to get involved in letting out and doing it. There are some other barriers that can help. You know, the house-to-homes loan I mentioned to you earlier on, it's quite complicated. I can talk to that with great experience. I'm probably the greatest user of the house-to-homes loans in Wales. I think I did probably the first large one. I had the Housing Minister for Wales up to do it. It was a scheme in Abergavenny where we used it, and it was worth me doing it because of the size of, you know, we borrowed £125,000. But the barriers that you've got to go to get it, if you are after a mere 15,000, it's quite expensive and quite difficult to do. I don't know how much that's been improved because I'm going back 3.5 years now. But I think it's trying to help people maybe getting some of their housing stock back up to standards or back on the market if it's a bit tired, as you talked about, becoming accidental landlords. Typically those are probably people who parents have died. The houses probably need doing up a bit, and I think it's some help in those regions. But I appreciate from a local authority's point of view, why should you spend money on doing up my house as a private landlord unless you get your money back?
Any questions? Other questions? Could I take this opportunity to again thank you for coming along this afternoon. You're more than welcome to stay, especially as Neil will be coming to the table shortly, if you like, but thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Could I call Mr. Neil Howells, who's the Head of Housing and Business Support, please? Hi, Neil. There's a good number of questions to be asked here. However, what I'm planning to do with the first couple, if you could be rather quick, if you like, because they don't need that much explaining, but they just need information, and then we'll get into the rhythm again. Again, this is in regarding section 4.1. Out of the circa 3,500 landlords which are privately renting their properties, how many are on a form of Torfaen County Borough Council landlords database? How many of the 3,500 do Torfaen County Borough Council actively engage with? And 3, how many of the 3,500 are accredited landlords? how many of the 3,000 are currently accredited landlords?
Thank you, Chair. We have done a huge amount of work to try to encourage private sector landlords to engage with us and to identify themselves to us, obviously, so we can offer them support and assistance. A significant piece of legislation has been brought in recently, which is going to greatly assist us to identify exactly who those 3,500 owners are. Well, I say 3,500 owners. Those landlords could be made up of, and I think, as Anthony said earlier on, typically local owners will own between 1 and 4 properties. There are some significant landlords who have a larger portfolio. So there could be in the region of 2,000 people, I suppose, who actually own properties within the borough. We don't actually know.
Can I stop you there? Sorry.
Yeah.
If these are just taster questions in regarding the the in-depth questions are coming up. I just wanted to give the members a flavour in regarding the private rental sector. So
the answer to the 3 questions then really, well, at this moment in time, we've done our best to try to encourage all landlords to make themselves known to us. We have an up-to-date database of those who have engaged with us. Yeah. I can get back to you in terms of the numbers that we've got on the database at the moment. In terms of regular engagement, that will be different from the numbers who attend the Landlord Hub. On average, we have about between 50 and 80 landlords attending the Landlord Hub, but there'll be a significant additional number who do have contact with, especially the new private sector housing team. But again, I can get back to committee with the specific numbers in response to those 3 specific questions.
And how many are accredited landlords?
Again, off the top of my head, as it stands at the moment, I don't know.
In regarding the 50 to 80 that attend the Landlord Hub, knowing that there's 3,500 landlords, it's a very, very small percentage that attend the Landlord Hub.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously the new legislation will tackle that head on in terms of ensuring that every landlord is registered and accredited over the next 12 months.
If I can go straight on to question 3, which is 4.3, the report indicates that temporary accommodation is only given to families who are homeless. How are individual single people, in particular under the age of 25-year-olds, currently being accommodated in regarding homelessness? And this relates to section 4.3.
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question. We do use temporary accommodation for things other than housing those who are homeless or potentially homeless. We do have a private sector lease arrangement, and we do use those private sector units to house those who are not in that either threatened with or homeless. There's only a small number of units that we have that we use to house people from the register, but we have got a stock of properties which we're trying to increase that portfolio, obviously, in terms of the new legislation.
But the report indicates that the temporary accommodation is only being given to families who are homeless. And the question is how are individual single people, particularly at the under 25, currently being accommodated in regarding homelessness?
Sorry, Chair, I suppose that it's the use of the word households. I suppose we include households, not just families, but those could be single units as well. We have a range of temporary accommodation stock ranging from bedsit, 1-bedroom flats, 2-bedroom flats, 3-bedroom flats, 2-bedroom houses, 3-bedroom houses. So we do accommodate both single individuals as well as families in the temporary accommodation.
Question 4. The last, which relates to section 4.4, also 7.4.1, which is page 12. The last private sector housing stock condition survey, which was carried out in 2010, estimated that £73.1 million will be needed to eradicate Category 1 hazards. 5 years on, what has been implemented to reduce this figure?
Okay. We will have used the specific capital grant that we are allocated each year to target neighbourhood renewal areas. And obviously you will note from the report that that grant allocation for Welsh Government has reduced significantly over the last number of years. So we use that. We encourage empty properties obviously to be brought back into use, and in doing that we can offer the Houses into Homes loans product, and in addition we have another 3 loans products that are available to local residents. But we're scratching the surface, quite frankly, in terms of the quality of properties in the private sector. And looking at the numbers, as at the introduction of the report, the vast majority of properties in Torfaen are in the private sector. They're owned, or they're in the private. They're being let through the private rented sector. And obviously that does rely on individuals investing their own money into the quality of improvements. So it's scratching the surface, really. We target specific capital grant into the remaining 3 renewal areas. We've got a range of loan products. We encourage owners of empty properties to bring them back into use, and that will obviously improve the quality there. But apart from that, obviously, as I said, there's the investment in energy efficiency works that we've been able to acquire through RBED and eco funding from Welsh Government as well. That'll specifically focus on energy efficiency works, and be a number of wards in the borough, probably 4 or 5 in the borough over the last 4 or 5 years that have benefited from those. But as I said, we're scratching the surface. Hence, I think the essential that this year we commission another stock condition survey to give us an up-to-date position, an understanding of how that's changed. And even if we were able to invest millions of money in the private sector to assist homeowners, as the age of properties obviously as properties age, they deteriorate. So there's an ongoing deterioration of those properties, even though we've been able to attract significant investment. So I'm sure members of this committee will be interested in the results of the latest stock condition survey, which we're about to commission. And obviously we'll have some interesting information and feedback perhaps to present to committee in the next three to 6 months.
I was interested in the fact that there was 73.1 million being spent to eradicate Category 1 hazards, if you like, and those are the major hazards, if you like, and I just wanted to know, I'm not sure if I got it, whether 5 years on, what has been implemented to reduce that?
Sorry, Chair. What that report, the part of the report says is that it would cost, not that we've attracted 73 million. So you would need 73 million pound to actually improve, or just to tackle those Category 1 hazards. There's no way that we've been able to, in the last 5 years, to attract that level of investment. We've done particularly well in terms of housing investment locally, but nowhere near that level of investment.
Thank you, Chair. This question relates to section 4.5, is on page 12, and is Housing Renewable Strategy. The report indicates that certain funding streams will either be reduced or redirected and combined to form another funding stream outside that directly associated to housing. How will reduction in funding impact on service delivery, and what further developments have been undertaken in regard to sourcing alternative funding to assist in the delivery of the housing renewal strategy? Thank you.
So it's an excellent question. We have benefited from, say, the specific capital grant from Welsh Government. And the figures in the that are captured at the top of page 7 relate to paragraph 7.4. That just goes to show, I suppose, the reduction in the investment since 2009-10, reduction from 1.6 million down to last year's 643,000. This coming year is the last year that we'll receive specific capital grant. Going forward, Welsh Government have indicated that they will subsume the specific capital grant into what they call in the Viable and Vibrant Communities, VVP, project. The 3 existing renewal areas have about 3.5 years left. The Council did declare those renewal areas some 6.5 years ago, and those renewal areas are declared for a period of 10 years. So there's a bit of a gap there of about 2.5–3 years between from the specific capital grant ending, and obviously what we've got to determine as a council, I suppose, is whether or not we want to continue to support the principle of supporting the continuation of those neighbourhood renewal areas for the remaining 2.5–3 years up to 2019-20, and if we do, whether or not then we want to include, we will be encouraged in September of this year to bid for VVP monies from Welsh Government going forward for 17-18 for a further 3 years. So again, whether as part of that bid that we develop, we would include an allocation of funding to replace the specific capital grant. So we've already had some discussion at Capital Programme Review Board really in terms of seeking members' views about continuing the commitment to the 10-year renewal area programme, and then whether or not we want to include the replacement of specific capital grant that we are going to lose from next year into the VVP bids that we put forward to Welsh Government for April 2017. Apart from that, you see the Council does not allocate any of its own capital resources to support the delivery of Neighbourhood Renewal Area programme.
The next one. This is designated neighbourhood renewal areas again. It's on page 12, 4.5 refers to. And the question is in regard to restricted areas. Are residents residing in a designated neighbourhood renewable area able to afford the 15% charging fee?
That fee relates to the agency. So obviously we have members of staff that can offer professional advice, guidance, assistance, negotiations with the builder, etc. That is optional. When we write to those who have been included in the renewal programme for the year, it is entirely up to them whether or not they use the agency service. They know obviously up front how much that is going to cost. I suppose it does come out of the grant allocation for that particular improvement to the property. But if they wish to undertake all that sort of site supervision and negotiation with the builders themselves, the contractor directly, then it's entirely up to them. I've got to say very few households who do benefit from renewal area improvements don't take up the agency fee, because it is a lot of hassle, especially if you're not, au fait with, liaising with contractors, etc. So the vast majority, in most instances, householders do take up that opportunity to have the neighbourhood renewal team to actually undertake that work on their behalf.
To carry on. The next one's on page 13, 4.7, Joint Housing Solution Service. Since the launch of the Joint Housing Solution Service, how effective has it been? Has the mentioned letting service been established? If so, can you give us a very short précis in regard to its current performance? And how will you monitor the service provided by the Joint Housing Solution Service so it remains effective?
The service has probably been in operation informally for about 12 months, but more formally over the last 9 months. It was developed as a result of, I suppose, the need for both local authorities to prepare for the new Housing Act that was going to be coming into force in April 2015. It's worked very well. If you think we've got two local authorities, even though the staff are co-located, two local authorities being integrated into one team. It has given us more flexibility, it has given us more resilience. We are able to cover annual leave commitment, sickness, absence, etc. We have been able to prepare services in light of the requirement for the new legislation that was brought in April last year. In terms of measuring its success, we developed a joint memorandum of understanding. So quite clearly in that memorandum of understanding, it identifies, I suppose, what the roles and responsibilities are for both local authorities, the both teams that we've got. We've got a private sector housing team as well as the housing solutions team, which focus on homelessness prevention in particular. So effectively, we've got a service level agreement, I suppose, between the local authorities, and quite detailed, I suppose. It identifies what we're looking for in terms of performance. But what we were able to do in the build-up to the new legislation is to develop two action plans, one for the homelessness legislation and one for the private sector, private rented sector. And we've been able to actively monitor the delivery of those action plans in terms of measuring success. So we are pleased with the joint service. We haven't yet launched the social lettings agency, although we have engaged with local landlords, and we have been able to lease a number of properties, as those we use for temporary accommodation to prevent homelessness or to assess homelessness. And we're starting to build a portfolio of other private sector properties. Again, because we are able to discharge our duties in terms of those who are homeless into the private sector, as well as the social lettings sector as well. So it has, you can imagine integrating two local authorities, two different teams. They are co-located. Huge requirement. If you think, we've started to prepare as a social care service for the new Social Services and Wellbeing Act in April. Huge amount of work needed, locally, regionally, etc. And the same sort of applied, not on the same scale, I suppose, but in terms of the preparation for the Housing Act for last year.
If I can ask question 8, and this relates to 7.2.1. And Torvine has carried out a wide range of engagement activities with local landlords to promote and encourage the growth of the PRS. Has engagement activities as outlined within 7.2.1 been welcomed by the landlords to promote the private rental sector?
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with, I suppose, the previous responses to Anthony. I suppose whether his mind went a blank, I suppose. But unfortunately, he didn't have the benefit of having the report sat in front of him when he was asked to comment on those. I think obviously what we have been able to deliver is documented in the following paragraphs there. Having a dedicated resource, Adam Harper was seconded into the role of private sector housing development officer, and the bullet points at the bottom of page 13 there and at 722, those sort of the areas that we really focused on analysing the private rented sector, the joint database, developing the landlord hub, etc. And what we have been able to do in terms of the landlord hub is documented in 726. There's a huge amount of energy and efforts gone in, I suppose, to support those landlords who have engaged with us, offering free accreditation, training, support, being able to access loans, the loans product. So there's a range of activities that are documented in the report there. And I think a lot of it, I recognise what Anthony has said, really. It's about building up relationships between the council and local landlords. In the past, it's fair to say that, the only engagement perhaps the council did have with landlords was probably one of enforcement, where we'd been notified that there was a particular problem with a landlord causing particular problems, and we were called in by the tenant to offer advice and guidance, etc. And those issues probably related to poor quality, perhaps high rents, hazards in terms of the housing health and safety rating system. So we've really worked hard to try and develop, I suppose, a partnership approach. I think it is appreciated. You know, it is documented how we've used the Housing Landlord Hub, the guidance, the advice, the assistance that we've offered. We've brought in sort of speakers, etc., to give that, and we've offered training. I think one of the other things we recognise is that, you know, landlords want an easy life at the end of the day, and they want to have a good tenant. So it is important that we don't just focus on the support that is available for landlords, but it's also trying to put in place appropriate training and an understanding for tenants to appreciate pre-tenancy before they go into a property, and that this could be in the social rented sector as it applies equally in the private rented sector. Really, what is expected of them in terms of paying their rent and keeping the property up to a certain standard, you know, applying for housing benefit if they're on low or minimal income, etc. So huge amount of energy and effort has gone in, let's say, to support those landlords who engage. The difficulty we've had is that, you know, a lot of the landlords that do own, you know, some of those 3,500 properties are still unknown to us. And if they haven't got a tenant who's perhaps not claiming housing benefit and they're not registering formally, then they would, you know, and they're not having any difficulties in terms of managing the property, then there isn't a need. And that's why the new legislation is a godsend to us in terms of trying to ensure that all landlords are registered. They do go through accreditation, they go through awareness training, etc. And we can support them better going forward, because we want to encourage especially those who are struggling with managing their properties to work with us, perhaps, so we could try and perhaps offer some additional support, guidance, training, but also encourage them to work with us maybe in terms of the building up the portfolio within a social lettings agency, because it serves a purpose for us in terms of increasing the supply of affordable quality housing locally in Torvine.
I know there's additional questions coming up in regarding the letting agency, but if we can move on to question 10, I think this would be in regarding the private tenanted sector, the leasing arrangements. Could you explain more about this particular arrangement, and does the authority claim additional costs indirectly from the tenant, although the tenant is still being held responsible for them? And has the tenant left a Torvine County Borough Council leased property in arrears or in debt?
The temporary accommodation scheme works on the basis that we negotiate with an owner of a property to enter into a lease where we do guarantee a rental income for the owner for a period of 3 to 5 years, usually 3, with a period to extend that. So there are benefits. I say the landlord doesn't have to be concerned about managing the property, receiving the. So we almost guarantee the rent. Obviously, the temporary accommodation that we use quite often is for those who are either threatened with or are homeless. The vast majority of those people are on some level of housing benefit, income support, etc. So the housing benefit does cover the rent. There is an additional management charge that we charge, but that is also covered by housing benefit. So there's a management fee because we manage the properties as temporary accommodation. There is a management fee, but that is recoverable from housing benefit as well. We try to keep in touch with individuals, but obviously you can imagine we are dealing with the most vulnerable people who are either potentially homeless or are homeless. And on occasion there are times when those individuals have to be evicted. They have not kept to the tenancy agreement, they haven't completed housing benefit forms, they may have been working, lost their job, etc., and haven't been able to pay the rental fees or the lease fees. So they have left the accommodation with arrears. If that happens, obviously we don't write those arrears off. We do pursue those arrears through our finance colleagues, and potentially we look to recover as much of the fees and costs as best we possibly can.
And that was my concern, and that's why I've raised it is because of the management fees, if like people who need support, and this is if like it's being brought to my attention, if like they've been entering into this lease agreement, but because they've defaulted, if like, not necessarily because of what they've done or basically haven't done. It's a case of because they've defaulted, they've been asked to leave with in excess of £1,500 worth of debt. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because the service, if you like, or the extra service which is being provided is just for the management, if like, and not necessarily down to the individual tenant. I could understand if the tenant was having extra supported needs in regarding a support worker coming in, etc. But if it's a case of just the management of the scheme, and knowing that that person is still responsible for them, if you like, and they are basically asking to be to leave the property, being evicted, whatever you want to call it, with a huge debt of £1,500, comparing that to, if you like, going into the private sector where there wouldn't be any management fees. There, yes, the chances are that he or she would have defaulted. However, they would have had less of a debt to basically overcome compared to £1,500. Possibly we are putting this tenant more at risk, because, as you pointed out, we will be continuing to chase them for that £1,500, and whether or not, if you like, that person will then find additional accommodation because of this big amount of debt. I'm not sure if Torvine County Borough Council is playing its part, if you like, in securing long-term accommodation for these potentially vulnerable people.
Okay. The reason why we place somebody in temporary accommodation in the first place is because they are vulnerable. They are stating that they're homeless. They are homeless or threatened with homelessness. So we don't put people in there other than those who apply to us and argue that they are threatened with homelessness or are actually homeless. So that accommodation is specialist accommodation, is temporary. We place people in there either to confirm what they're telling us is correct. Obviously, we've got a role to play in terms of understanding the reasons why they're potentially or homeless. The management charge, the easiest way to explain that is that Bronavon and Melin will have a range of properties. They will have housing officers who offer tenancy management support to their tenants. That's what the management charge is. It's basically a housing officer who has a number of properties whose role it is to manage the properties in terms of the condition and to support the tenant. They're not support workers. If an individual requires additional support, they are assessed at the point of their application to establish whether or not they need additional support. So they could be getting free support as well as the support of a housing officer. £1,500 doesn't accrue overnight. It builds up over a period of months. For that to have happened, I'm sure that the housing officer will be visiting our property on daily, weekly basis. If we can't gain access, we leave cards, calling cards, etc., and we do our best to make sure that we're in regular contact with individuals. We can't always make that contact. Some people abandon the property, some people try their utmost to avoid us. We've got to say we are talking about the small proportion here of all the properties. It is only but unfortunately we do get the rare occasion where we have to evict people because they haven't done something, failed to do something, in terms of securing housing benefit or additional income, etc., to be able to pay the cost, or they fail to provide us with required information. So somebody is not evicted or put in that difficult position, say overnight, and it's not done lightly. It is, in my view, obviously, if somebody is threatened with homeless or is homeless and is put in temporary accommodation, for them to be evicted from that accommodation is a failure on both our parts. That individual will have had a number of letters from us, a number of requests to contact us to try to work with them to deal with the issues that they're facing. But unfortunately, quite often when it gets to very vulnerable individuals who are in very difficult situations, the ostrich syndrome sort of comes in, and people stick their head in the sand. Our role is not to evict people from temporary accommodation. It's to support them to move on to more permanent, appropriate accommodation. But quite often, well, I wouldn't say quite often, but on occasion we do fail.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Neil, perhaps I should have asked the other gentleman this question, but reading this report, it says, with requirements of all private landlords and letting agencies to become registered from 2015. Now, as we are aware, the private landlords can go to the hub, and we are in contact with the hub. But what about letting agencies? Do they contact us at all? Because, if they don't go to the hubs and they are just letting these houses out, these are the people really that we want to get onto the system.
Yeah, I said that you quite rightly identified page.
Sorry,
part
15 now.
Yes, and it's 726, but it's about 2 or 3 paragraphs down. Yeah. It requires both landlords and any lettings agents to register, so it's a must. We do have some lettings agents that are represented on the hub, so it's open to all. And I know that when Adam Harper was in his role as the private rent sector liaison officer, he did a huge amount of work to engage with the lettings agents as well as the landlords, because obviously quite often the landlords are registered with the agent, and they are an access route for us to actually get information and intelligence about who they work with as well. And in fairness, we have worked quite closely with the lettings agents locally as well. So we've built up that rapport and relationship. So there is a requirement of both landlords and any agents working on behalf of agents. So the intention is over the next 12-18 months, that all of those will be registered. The reality is they won't, because despite our best efforts, despite the Welsh Government launching this new requirement, this new legislation, there will be some people out there who don't recognise themselves as a landlord.
Yes.
They've acquired a property, they've inherited a property, and another, maybe from another relative passing on, an aunt, an uncle, or a grandfather, grandmother, etc., and they're letting that property out to a family friend or another relative in the family, etc. They don't register that themselves or recognise themselves as a landlord. So it will take some time. Unfortunately, after a period of time, there will be an element then of obviously chasing those landlords or those people to try to make sure that they understand what is required of them. They have to be registered, they have to be licensed, they have to go through accreditation. But it will take a period of a couple of years for that message to thoroughly get through. So I think members have a role to play in terms of, I know your surgeries and people asking for your advice and guidance, as well as the local authority and Welsh Government getting that message across.
A very quick one. The new Act, which hasn't come in yet, it should be in, but it's not. Yeah, it's the house. It is in, is it? The licensing part it's in already.
The requirement, yeah, they've launched it, so it's live, but landlords have until, I think it's April next year to register.
Right. There's a cost to landlords, isn't there, to register and the training. Do you think that will deter landlords from being licensed, shall I say, you know, the cost of it and what they have to go through?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's a significant amount. I can't remember whether it's £50 now, it's £100 to actually register. It was 50 at one stage, but I haven't, so I can confirm that. It's not a significant amount when you think about the weekly income and perhaps the annual income that a landlord is potentially receiving, I suppose. And obviously the process does support the landlord in terms of identifying, I suppose, what is expected of them as a landlord. It's only, I think, you know, as Anthony referred to earlier on, the vast majority of landlords that we deal with are excellent. They know what's expected of them. They know, you know, how to conduct themselves as landlords. There are only one or two rogue landlords that we deal with that, you know, we have got concerns about, and we continue to support those to improve. I think the biggest issue is going to be about, you know, those people who don't see themselves as landlords registering and understand what is required of them. I think those who have a number of properties will understand what's expected of them. It is a nominal amount that you have to register, the fee to register, and the training isn't that significant. And you know, it's really good practice guidance, really, and it's to help the landlord as well as them understanding, I suppose, what's expected of their tenants as well. You know, so that it is there to support. You know, the landlord to understand their rights and responsibilities, which means that, you know, that they shouldn't, their tenant shouldn't be abusing their property either in terms of not paying the rent or the property deteriorating as a result of the actions of the tenant.
But there isn't anything in the legislation at the moment to protect the landlords from, say, you know, you just said before, when tenants abscond, you know, owing rent, there's no protection, is there, for the landlords?
Yes, absolutely. There is protection. Yes, there is, in terms of, you know, enforcement action that can be taken, and obviously the landlord has, you know, a lot of the time the landlord will have to take the tenant to court, unfortunately, but they'll have to gather the evidence so they can take photographs, etc. So they can, you know, they will have to take, you know, there is appropriate legislation to support the landlord to tackle a poor tenant.
If the landlord can find them to take them to court, yeah.
If we can move on to the social letting service, and this again is 7.2.5 under 14. If a social letting service is to be offered at a cost to the landlord, what would be the benefits to the landlord signing up to the local authorities agency as opposed to an existing private sector lettings agency? Is this going to be a duplication of service that is currently being provided within the private rented sector already? And if so, would the council be making it harder for the existing businesses to survive? And what are the risks facing the local authority in relationship to setting up a social letting agency in the first place?
I suppose that the benefit to a landlord will include taking away, I suppose, the stress and anxiety that may come with dealing with letting a property on a regular basis. If you are guaranteed, if you have got a property that is in good condition and you are guaranteed a regular income each month for a period of 3 to 5 years without having to get involved in managing that property, dealing with the repairs, then that's a big bonus potentially for some landlords, not all. And I think, you know, those with a larger portfolio over a number of different localities, it may not be something that they may be interested in. But we especially want to target perhaps those people we have already talked about today, who perhaps are only own the one property or one or two properties, and letting a property and managing it and making sure they get the rent coming in and dealing with the tenants, dealing with environmental health or housing benefit is a hassle. They may be employed themselves, you know, it's not a full-time job, it's an income that they rely upon as a bonus. Then I suppose we can take all of that away. We can enter into a long-term lease. We can We will deal with, housing benefit applications. We will dealing with the tenant, supporting the tenant. They can become members of the hub. They will get regular information from us. They will get training, support, etc. So whatever it takes, really. What we have developed is a draft landlord's offer, which, if members of the committee are interested, I can circulate that subsequently, with about, I suppose, a range of 10 to 15 different incentives to encourage landlords to work with us. And I suppose they can pick off that list what is most important to them.
Sorry, would these be additional to the service that is already being provided within the private sector?
Absolutely. And at a reduced cost. A lot of the existing agents do require landlords to stump up a hefty join-in fee. We're not talking about that. We're talking about free services here. We are trying to encourage landlords to work with us so that we can develop affordable homes. So it will be a regular income, but as Anthony mentioned earlier on, and it is something that he recognises, if we enter into a long-term lease and you're guaranteed a hassle-free income, then it would have to be at local house allowance level rather than at a local market level, which may be higher. But then you would have to deal with all of those issues yourselves, dealing with the tenant, dealing with repairs, etc. So there's about 14 or 15 different incentives that we've put together in a pack, which, a lot of these services are free, that try to encourage those landlords who it would be a positive step for them to hand over their property over a period of time for us to manage and maintain, to let to as an affordable rent within Torvine, and obviously then we can review that lease period after 3 or 5 years, as I've said.
And so would you say that you're duplicating or adding?
I think we're supplementing. The bottom line is that we see, if you look at the figures, the introduction to this report, we've got a bit of it's not local, it's not regional. We've got a national housing crisis, in my view. We have not got enough quality, affordable homes available for local residents. The vast majority of local people are on low incomes or rely on some form of benefit. It's very difficult to access a mortgage now unless you've got significant earnings or you've got a particular high level of lump sum to access the owner occupation sector. There are other benefit changes. The under 35s that Adrian Hakim made reference to, universal credit that Anthony Davis mentioned. Those are going to be additional obstacles in the way of local residents in terms of accessing. People in the future, under 35s from 2 years, in 2 years' time, will not get all of their housing benefit paid for them if they're living in a one-bedroom flat. There'll be a gap, and they will have to find the gap themselves. If they're not securing additional income from elsewhere, they're not working, and they're not going to be able to do that. So we have to be more creative in terms of what products we've got available as well, in terms of more shared housing potentially, because the government is insistent that obviously they will only be paying benefit up to a local housing allowance rate, which doesn't cover the cost of an average one-bedroom flat for an under 35 person living in Torvine.
And so, in regard, apart from the setting up cost, if you like, which I would imagine would be borne by Torvine Council, if like it would be, it would run by the income generated by the landlords themselves.
The intention is to break even. Is not to make money with that. But and obviously, thankfully, we have got from Welsh Government transitional funding this year and next year now guaranteed, which we can use to establish the social license agency. So it's not a cost borne on the council. But we've already got the teams in place. It'll just be a question of. I don't think we should have a big bang either. I think it's a slowly approach that when we're ready, we can acquire and encourage landlords to work with us to develop the agency. And I think certain incentives will entice certain landlords, I suppose. So, and I think that's why I suppose the new requirement for landlord accredited licensing, so registration and accreditation, is going to assist us, because we can then target those individuals who may only have one or two properties locally, who may be interested in that sort of that sort of arrangement.
Norma, could you ask question 14, please? 14. Yes, please.
Right. The private rented sector again has been referred to, page 14.725. With house prices increasing, how are you going to convince new landlords to set their rent to the level that will be at local housing allowances rates or below? Again, how are single people under the age of 25 going to be accommodated? You mentioned the 35, but it's even worse really for the under 25. And do you envisage discretionary housing payments rising in the future? I know you've touched on that.
Yeah, I think obviously the previous response covered a lot of that. I think we've got to become more creative, I suppose, in terms of the products that we offer. We had a recent member seminar where I touched upon, or gave an update in terms of the local housing strategy. And one of the things they explored there was for us to consider with our partners developing shared accommodation, because effectively that's all that younger people are going to be able to afford. And I think in terms of, we have to offer potential incentives to landlords to work with us to lease their properties. But I think with the range of options that we've developed there for the landlord offer, with the guaranteed income, then potentially we would entice some of those landlords to work with us. I think, we've started to have some initial discussions with Bronavon and Melin about potentially converting larger 3-bedroom family homes in some of the less popular areas to shared accommodation. Now there's difficulty there, I suppose, because there isn't a lot of shared accommodation in Torfaen, and it's going to be new to a lot of communities. It will be new to a lot of members. But if you think about, the Newports, the Swanseas, the Cardiff of this world, when they've got large hospitals or universities, a lot of the accommodation in those cities are shared, specifically targeting single younger working people or those in university. And so I think communities perhaps are going to have to, I suppose, embrace maybe a different sort of way of living, and perhaps for us to work in partnership with private sector landlords, with our RSL partners, to explore different options to accommodate the young people, because we can't build enough smaller units of accommodation quick enough to meet demand. We've got 2,500 people on the waiting list at any one time, but we're only actually letting about between 700, 800 units per year. So there's a big gap there. And with universal credit, with the new welfare benefit reform, it's going to hit those younger people hardest. In addition, I think there's more we can do. There's hundreds of people, older people on the waiting list. Now, a lot of those will have registered just in case something goes wrong or their circumstances change. But a lot of those older people are living in their own properties. Now, some of those could be getting to an age whereby the property is starting to become a bit more unmanageable, or they haven't got the capital to invest in a new roof because the roof is starting to deteriorate, or actually they can't get up and down the stairs perhaps as they used to. So I think we've got to be a bit more creative in terms of encouraging maybe older people who own their own properties or are currently under-occupying those, maybe to offer them something a bit more appropriate in terms of, I know the obvious thing that has been said a number of times is perhaps bungalows, but I think bungalows are expensive to deliver and they take time, and so it's more appropriate accommodation, level access, more affordable, etc. On the basis that maybe some of our partners may be interested in perhaps again leasing a property or purchasing a property off that individual to bring it back into use, convert it into shared multiple occupation, etc. So we are increasing the portfolio in that way.
Any other questions regarding that particular topic? I'm conscious of the time, if you like, so I think if we can turn initially to question 19, and if we've got time we'll go back, and this is to do with the quality of the housing stock. And it's page 17, specifically 7.4.1. The report states that Torvine has a large number of older properties that are deteriorating and in need of significant investment and upgrading. Can you give information as to the makeup of residents who own these particular older properties? And there's a secondary question. With the reduction of the specific capital grant programme and the uncertainty that a loan scheme product will be successful for low-income residents, how many applications have been received in order to access an interest-free loan to help homeowners improve their properties? How many of the applicants were successful? What alternative support has Torvine County Borough Council offered the unsuccessful applicants? And finally, what alternative funding can be made available to ensure that the alluded to properties can be brought up to a Liverpool and rentable standard? If you want me to go through any of those, I'm more than welcome.
Remember that one. It's a difficult one. Obviously, the Welsh Government have shifted their stance from offering the opportunity for local authorities to access grants to encouraging development of loan products. We've known for some time, obviously, the specific capital grant, social housing grant, has been diminishing, and therefore we have developed 4 loan products locally. You've got empty properties, home improvement loans. There's loans that we offer within renewal areas, and most recently we've developed a loan product for Pontypool specifically through the VVP programme. The recently commissioned, we're in the process of commissioning a stock condition survey. So to answer your first question, really, we'll be in a better position to better understand, I suppose, the makeup of those residents living in owner-occupied properties who have got properties that are deteriorating. So in the next 6 months, as I said, what I'd like to do and offer is possibly bring the results of the stock condition survey back to committee in its next cycle, potentially, so that we'll have some really rich information there about the quality of the property, the makeup of the people who live there, their abilities, disabilities, their investment opportunities, etc. So, we'll have a lot of detail perhaps in the next 6 months that would be able to, better inform that discussion. I haven't got details about, but I can provide committee subsequently with details about the number of applications we've had for the various loan products and how many have been successful and those who haven't. It will be as important, I suppose, to provide the reasons why people haven't progressed with things. It's not always about not being able to afford to repay the loan. There could be a number of factors that will play a part in it. So if you're happy, Chair, what I'll offer is to perhaps put a bit of a briefing note together in terms of applications for the various loan products, those that have been successful, how much money we've been able to get out of the door, and some analysis as to those that haven't been successful and the reasons why they don't. I'll be honest with you, those who haven't progressed, there is very limited other than trying to offer guidance, support and assistance. Very little else we can do really in terms of, we know there are a number of households out there who are really, really struggling, and I think, as I said earlier on, I suppose it goes back to the local authority working with its partners perhaps to think about alternative solutions, like, for instance, acquiring a property off somebody who hasn't got the ability to repay a loan to improve their property, asking them whether or not actually the property itself is suitable now going forward for themselves, looking at what alternative there may exist, but offer some incentive perhaps to maybe offer that property either on a lease basis or for the partners to purchase, to bring it back into a use, or to look at some alternative, because I can't think of...
With your experience then in regarding this field at the moment, if people cannot, renovate their property or upgrade it, do they tend to sell them on then at the moment, or do they just say, right, we'll mothball it, if you like, for X amount of years, and in that period of time the property deteriorates even more, etc., etc.? What's your experience?
I think there'll be a mixture of those, Chair. There'll be some that realise that, that the best thing is to sell the property on. The difficulty they'll have then, if the property has deteriorated, is obviously their expectations in terms of how much that property is worth is going to be, is probably going to be in excess of what they're actually going to acquire, because despite the fact we say there's a housing shortage, it's also lots of people are trying to sell their properties at the moment, and obviously if the property isn't in tip-top condition, in the right location, the right size, etc., then they're going to struggle to sell it. So you're right. I think it's a combination of things, and that's why I think the council needs to explore those alternatives. Really, we're not going to come up with all the solutions ourselves. Unfortunately, we haven't got that capital investment, but I think we've started to have initial discussions with our partners about exactly that. Really, is to if somebody isn't, if somebody has applied for a loan and that hasn't been a successful route for them, we shouldn't just leave it there. It should be a case of, depending on they may have withdrawn, circumstances may have changed, they may have sold the property, etc. But we need to explore what else we could do to support those individuals.
Right, Chairman. As regards the quality of housing stock, is on page 17.7.5.2. I believe that Torfaen County Borough Council are one of the first authorities across Wales excuse me in regard to bringing empty properties back into use. Will this continue? And the numbers for the years 2014-15 won't do any good, have reduced. Is this because there are less empty properties across Torfaen, or empty homes are now becoming difficult to find? Sorry about my voice.
Yeah, you are right, Councillor. We were delighted to be one of the first local authorities, or probably the second or the third local authority in Wales to actually launch the empty property loans, houses into homes scheme, and we have been successful in supporting owners of empty properties to bring those back into use. There has been a bit of a reduction. I think it's inevitable, I suppose, is that that there's going to be a plateauing of the numbers of properties that we are able to bring back into use. I think there is probably an average number of properties of about 350 that are empty at any one time. Some of those have been empty for some significant periods, and I'll be honest with you, some of them in the north of the borough, perhaps Blenavon in particular, there is a number, a significant number that are in poor condition and been empty for a significant period. And in the past, our approach has been very much to support the owners to bring those properties back into use, to encourage, to offer loans, etc. I think we're going to have to be a bit more, I suppose, forceful going forward for those that have been empty for significant periods, and target some enforcement action for those owner-occupiers who have ignored that offer of help and support. Because we have been successful, you can't keep on, I suppose, empty properties, there is churn continually, weekly, monthly, yearly, but at any one time there's a set number of properties that are empty. as soon as they're been empty for a period of time, we will get in touch with the owner and ask them to explain why the property is empty and to offer them support and assistance to bring it back into use. The difficulty we've got going forward is that the method we used to use to identify those properties is changing, because obviously there used to be an incentive that we offered through council tax for those properties, those owners of properties that have been empty for a period. That now has obviously changed, and we're going to have to explore different ways of identifying longer-term empty properties going forward. It's not unique to Torfaen. I think it's the case across the board, across the whole of Wales. So in terms of monitoring those longer-term empty properties, we're going to have a bit of more of a challenge. There is a healthy balance in that pot of money, so the loans product and the amount of money that's available is still there. I think it's just a case that we've been successful. You can't keep on rising. I suppose there's been a bit of a plateau in terms of the numbers of properties that we've brought back into use. I think we are now dealing with more difficult ones, which are going to require more enforcement action, and of course that then requires Duncan Smith's colleagues, environmental health, legal services, to take more enforcement action. I know that obviously there's a capacity and a resource issue there in terms of those, limited resources, limited staff and money to be able to take that enforcement action and bring in those properties back into use. We're going to have to with some, obviously, if any of those properties are causing particular community concerns about whether it's antisocial behaviour, infestation, etc., then we do target those. But I think there are some then that have been empty, but they are secure, they're safe, they're not causing a particular problem, but it's something that we're going to have to monitor going forward.
Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, I mightn't have caught this, but I'm only going back to your last lot of questioning. What alternative funding can be made available to ensure that these properties can be brought back up to livable and rentable standards?
That was the private sector condition deteriorating.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
It's it. If those we have renewal areas. There are four loan products that we have available that we've launched over the last 18 months, 2 years in Torfaen. We have grants that are available in the renewal areas, in the declared renewal areas, and we have been able to attract investment from Welsh Government to improve the energy efficiency of properties in certain areas as well. Again, all of that money is limited pot of money, and we do rely upon every time that Welsh Government have identified Welsh Government RBID monies, we've bid, and we've been particularly successful. Unfortunately, we did bid for this year, and we were unsuccessful for the first time. But in the past, we have been able to secure monies for Blanavon, Trefethin, Cwmysacoi and Thornhill in terms of energy efficiency measures. Having said that, unfortunately the funding is only up to 250 properties at a time, so we know that obviously if more money was available, we would like to do another 250 properties in Neil's ward or Stewart's ward or whatever, in Thornhill, etc. But unfortunately the allocation is across Wales, and it relies on us being successful when we put those bids in. We do bring empty properties back into use. We've got that loan product, and we've got other loans products that are available. But apart from that, there isn't any investment going in other than from individuals to the private sector.
Can I say why I asked this question? Because we were webcasting, I thought people may listen and look in and think what is out there for them.
There's only two questions which I think really need answering. If Norma is still okay, could you ask 23 and 24, please?
You want to ask 23 and 24?
Yes, please.
23 relates to rented homes bill. It's on page 18, point 9.1.1. How will the council ensure landlords continue to comply with the renting homes bill?
through the Landlord Hub, through publicity, through using Torvine Homes website, any opportunity really, through Torvine Talks. It's raising the profile. Welsh Government obviously have launched the scheme. I think their publicity could be improved or continue, but locally we are doing our best to use a range of different forums, communication channels to raise the profile of the need for landlords to register. So again, if any members got any ideas to raise that understanding that and communicate more widely, then let us know, and we'll be keen to explore those avenues.
Thank you. And the last question. Actions to be taken following consideration. You want by the Scrutiny Committee, right? How is Torvine County Borough Council going to develop a formal private renter sector strategy? Who is going to be consulted? When is it to be completed and implemented?
Okay. Well, Housing Services are going to take responsibility to coordinate the development of the strategy. We'll do so probably over the next 6 months, and there'll be an opportunity for a wide-ranging sort of opportunity for engagement, and we'll use the Strategic Housing Forum. We'll use the Inclusive Forum. We'll probably engage with all of our partners, members included in that. Whether we draft or develop a draft initially and then circulate that for comments, etc. But again, quite happy if it suits to suggest that a draft, if we can manage it, comes to a future scrutiny committee for scrutiny before it's agreed and launched.
Any other questions from the table? No. Well, could I take this opportunity to again thank you, Neil. It's been a long afternoon, and what we'll do now is we'll draw up some recommendations and obviously forward them on to the executive member. Thank you much indeed.
Thank you.
Again, you're more than willing to stop if you want to, Neil. We can have. Okay, in regarding the recommendations, the committee members, you have now had the opportunity to scrutinise and ask specific questions in regard to the suggested scrutiny activity. What I'm going to do, I think it's always handy to actually read the scrutiny activity again, just to make sure that we understand what the recommendations have got to link into. And again, it's the Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committees have been asked to review and scrutinise the steps taken to minimise the impact that the reduction of funding could have on developing the local housing market, and in particular to assess the approach that is being taken by Housing Services to develop the private rented sector, or the PRS, consider how reductions in funding will impact on service delivery, and 3, make appropriate recommendations to the executive member where appropriate. With that in mind, I now open the table up for suggested recommendations to be considered.
Housing Renewal Fund, for the benefit of the camera. And yeah, just be aware that the Pont Newydd ward currently enjoys the benefit of being one of those areas in which residents can apply for housing renewal. As Neil, I think, made pretty plain, the amount of money available for housing renewal across Torvine, or against for those areas which are currently designated as recipients, has reduced significantly over the last few years, and indeed the amount of alternative money that housing are able to source in order to make up for some of that loss is very much restricted. And of course, what we don't do anymore as a council is provide capital funding from the amount of money we get from Welsh Government as a, simply for being a council, we're entitled to a capital sum, and we decide what to do with that. Obviously, we have capital receipts as well, and we decide what to do with that. And what we do with that funding, pretty much 100%, is actually use it to fulfil our policy in respect of the 21st Century School Programme. Now, I think that's the right thing to be doing because that fell in line with our priorities. But every now and then you just need to review the impact of taking such decisions. Same point was made in Council this morning by Stephen Jarrett, I think, saying that the amount of money available from the Council's own resources for roads and whatever else, improving and maintenance of the road network in Torfaen, we weren't actually being able as a council to put, or we had chosen not to put in any money to highways for that purpose. Again, because there is a greater need, or there was a greater need at least when that decision was taken. And I think we probably just need to check or ask probably Nigel Aurelius to check where we are in relation to the 21st Century School Programme in terms of what we can expect to come up and require funding in the next few years, and see if there is a potential for tailing off some aspects of that funding for schools, and look instead potentially at whether other services, including housing and highways, should be the beneficiary of that, because I think it's been made pretty clear that the amount of support a reduced housing service can offer, both in terms of person power and in terms of funding to support, in terms of the Empty Houses programme, in terms of housing solutions, all of that is very much under pressure as a consequence of austerity, but also our own priorities. And although schools are still very much a priority, which the Council has sort of endorsed today in terms of the corporate plan, the fact is we ought to be making sure that the evidence on which we based that decision some time ago still applies, and whether there is unintended harm to other services. So I think that's my suggestion, really.
In a nutshell, how can we condense that to...
Well, it's to refer, it's to ask the appropriate officers to give us a breakdown of how capital resources, whether grants or receipts, are being used, and what are the prospects of being able to divert some of those possibly to other services, including housing.
Part of the capital, or if the grant is being transferred to VVP, isn't it? And so Neil indicated that there might be scope to do further investigations in regarding what and how that VVP money is going to be spent, and so I think that would be another or the same recommendation. I think regarding the hub, and I think we need to do a lot more work in regarding attracting private sector landlords to the hub, if you like, and I think we've got to promote it and advertise it more, if you like, and but it's not only in regarding the hub is basically what the hub can access. I think that's important as well, because we've talked about various schemes as such, and so it's bringing to the attention of the local resident is what's out there and what can be accessed if they wanted to, if you like, to include the third parties. Because we've mentioned the Right Move Bond scheme, but also there's the Supporting People team as well, if you like, and these come under the third sector. I've actually written one down. It's promote and advertise all private rental services and support across Torfaen, to include the private sector landlords hub, Torfaen County Borough Council housing services, and third sector organisations, i.e. Seren Living Bond Scheme and Torfaen County Borough Council Supporting People team, thereby advertising by way of possibly Torfaen Talks and the Argus, for example. But we need to basically promote it a bit more.
Could I just say, Chair, that I was very impressed with the hub, hearing from the hub, with landlords that are prepared to work with councils and with local authorities and working with people. And I think what Torfaen Housing has done, I think that's marvellous, bringing in this new legislation to house owners. It protects the tenant and it protects the owner, and I think it's marvellous. But again, the only people that we need to be trying to work hard and get to are the bad landowners, you know, and householders. But I certainly think that we're going in the right direction, and I was very encouraged with today's seminar.
Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chair. We have to assess the approach that is being taken by the housing services, and I think they have had the right approach. They've done a great deal with what little they have, if you know what I mean, because they don't have, you know, money thrown at them for this sort of thing. I think they have worked hard, and the approach is the correct one. The barrier is the reduction in funding, and that will have a huge impact already. And my colleague here has given indication how we might be able to divert or find funding in other places. I think, you know, we've got to be fair to them because they have worked really hard, and I think the approach has been the correct one.
Anything else?
Well, I'm just aware that under the terms of your prejudicial interest, your suggestion needs to be endorsed by someone else. So I endorse it.
Could I ask Leanne to outline if there's any further possible recommendations which we possibly might have missed, if you like?
I think the only one really which might be worth the committee considering is the future scrutiny activity of the private rental sector strategy, which Neil said will be developed later on in 16-17. So that might be worth the committee considering to look at later, and whether the policy is fit for purpose before it goes into Cabinet.
I know it's hard to come up with the recommendations, especially after a full afternoon. But what I would say is that after today, if you think of any recommendations, please let Leanne know. And again, what we'll do is, before we send it on to the executive member, we will make sure that you see the draft copy, and again, we can make any alterations to it to suit the committee's wishes at the end of the day. Okay? Okay, with that in mind then, if we can move on to agenda item number 6. Can I bring in Leanne again to confirm the item to be considered as part of the next scheduled meeting, please?
Thank you, Chair. The next item due to be scrutinised is Trading Standards Collaboration with Blaenau Gwent County Borough Council. So Kim Pugh is in receipt of the proforma as per the visioning session in July. So hopefully she's busily writing the report in readiness for I'm going on to the next agenda item. The next meeting on the 24th of February at 1:30.
Could a copy of the pro forma be sent to the committee members as well, so that they can see exactly what is being asked for, if like from the officer? Okay.
The 24th of Feb meeting, as I'll be elsewhere.
Mexico.
No, Cape Verde actually.
With that in mind, I look forward to seeing everyone else on the 24th, and I declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.